Fallacies. So I have something really cool in resources for you to look at. If you go to resources and you click up that says Hurley LL and you download that, it'll download as a zip file, and then you got to click extract all to open it up, and then you've got to open it up and open up another file and open up another file until you get to the blue letter F. It says main. Click on that. This is a simple program, so it won't take up much memory for you. Then go to chapter 3. So here we are in chapter 3. Now I'm not going to take the time to go over it, but I highly recommend that you go over this chapter 3 for the reason that, okay, I forgot your name. What's your name again?
Trevor.
Trevor, for the reason Trevor said in his post this week, that this stuff really is so relevant because we are so used to the internet troll. We even have a new name for it now, right? Where people just vilify one another. And they think that they're arguing. That's not arguing. That's just mudslinging. Can't make any progress that way. Can't learn anything from anybody that way. And what they're committing often are informal fallacies like an ad hominem attack. So what's that? Rather than attacking the argument, you attack the person. So you can call me fat and bald if you like, but that doesn't mean that what I'm saying isn't true, right? It doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about, right? So this is just so common. There are terms that you throw out at people. Any common terms you think of that people throw around to just shut down conversation because it's basically a personal assault. Anybody have any terms come to mind? You're a... Okay, you're an asshole. Okay, well that's not very nice. I have one, but it's not really relevant, right? So I don't know why we're talking about this. But anyway, back to our conversation. What is it we were arguing about? Let's say somebody bring up some argument. What are we arguing about? Politics. What about politics? Everyone's afraid to talk, right? Well, this is good practice. I mean, on one hand, it's kind of nice to do philosophy on things that are completely inane and nobody's going to get upset about, because then you don't have emotions clouding your reasoning, right? But on the other hand, it's good practice to bring up things that actually are really controversial, where it's going to get emotional, because it's so important to learn how to put your emotions in check. To cool it. Emotions are good, right? Emotions are good. That's an important part of who we are. Not dissing emotions. But it's important to learn how to cool the emotions so that you can think. Right? I gave you the corny little examples of getting on my motorcycle, and it was in October, and it was drizzling, and it was slippery, and I started sliding, getting onto the expressway. And I just kept sliding and then gained control. But, a few months before that, what did I do? I started sliding and I knew what to do. Keep that back brake locked. Better do a low slide than a high side. But I didn't because I freaked out. Got brain freeze. Fear, panic, emotion. And caused me a few broken ribs, right? Well, what was the difference? Well, the difference was after that first accident where I totaled the bike, I realized, hey, I knew the right answer, but I didn't do it. Why? Because of fear and panic. You got to learn to control your emotions. So I bought a dirt bike and went to the Little O, Mountain White Cloud, and kept experiencing what it is to have a motorcycle out of control. And you got to keep falling, but at least you're falling in the sand. Not so bad. And that's why the second time when I was sliding on the slick pavement, I didn't freak out at all. I thought, yeah, I'm probably going down. That's going to stink. right? But I got all my gear on, I'll just slide, whatever. Hopefully I don't hit anything. If I do, I do. There's nothing I can do about it. In other words, I kept my cool. I just slid. So I didn't panic, which would lead me to do something dumb, which would certainly have gotten me in a bad wreck, right? So the point is that when you're driving or whatever it is you're doing, this is not to criticize emotions. Yes, emotions are good. But if you don't know how to hold them in check, like in this case then, reasoning about something in politics, you end up just calling people nasty names, attacking them personally. You're not thinking. You're not reasoning. That's not arguing in the serious sense of the word. So yes, you don't want to engage in ad hominem attacks. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, we have fallacies of relevance. Now, we're not going to watch or listen to this stuff. I'm just going to talk about it real quick. So, number one, there's appeal to force. You better believe that what I'm saying is true, because if you don't, I'm going to hit you in the face. All right? Okay, whether or not you're going to hit me in the face, does that actually have anything whatsoever to do with whether or not what I'm saying is true? No, it doesn't. So, go ahead and, shut down speech if you want, but it doesn't mean that what you're saying is true. Okay, appeal to pity. Oh, you got to feel so bad for him, and it's so sad. Now, is this saying don't pity? Don't have pity. Don't love. No, that's not what this is saying. But this is saying that if the reasons that you're giving for your argument are unrelated to your conclusion, you're arguing badly, you're committing an informal fallacy. One way of doing that is appeal to pity. Come on, George has to be right, because after all, George got third-degree burns a month ago, and he's in a lot of pain still. So it must be that what George says is true. No, that's completely irrelevant. I'm really sad that he's in pain from his burns. Really, I am. I'm serious. That's terrible. And I'd like to visit him and wish him well. But that doesn't mean that what he's saying is true, though. Just because he's in pain, and we do have genuine pity for him. Does that make sense? Does any argument come to mind on any of these where people do this kind of thing, and you can think of an example? Appeal to pity. Well, think about it. Watch this, and he gives you a bunch of examples. Okay, what about appeal to the people? Woohoo! Don't you want to be either everybody's doing it, so you have a bandwagon. Everybody thinks this way, so it must be true. Well, again, just because a lot of people think that way, that doesn't mean it's true. Could be everybody thinks that X is true, doesn't mean that X is true. Could be that they're all wrong. It's not a popularity contest. It's not a matter of voting. But often that happens, You want to be cool, right? You want to be part of the in crowd. And so you end up just checking your freedom and your mind at the door, and you're allowing other people to think for you. Groupthink. Very, very common. Okay, what about argument against the person? Again, you're just arguing against the person. George, Sally, whoever, Julio, they can't be right because what? One of you gave an example of a car salesman. I forgot who that was, but in the post this week, somebody gave an example of a car salesman. That was you, right? And said, well, that's a good example. Does the car salesman have a motive for selling you a car? Well, obviously. Okay, then. So because the car salesman stands to benefit from you financially, well, then what they're saying is false. No, not necessarily. Yeah, but they stand to, they're a car salesman, and that's what they're there to do is sell. So they're lying. What they say is not true about this car. That doesn't follow. That's totally irrelevant. Maybe I'm going to be a little more suspicious. I'm going to be a little more cautious. Double check what he or she is saying. But no, just because they have something to gain, that doesn't prove that what they're saying is not true. Right? Okay, argument against the person is circumstantial. Well, that's the example I just gave. is because of their circumstances that they're in, well, it must be then that what they're saying is false. Or argument against the person. We already talked about that. You're just attacking the person. Okay, how about accident? You're using some law and you're applying it to something that it was not meant to be used for. Great examples in there. Listen to it, watch it. Straw man, what is that? You are setting up a caricature of your opponent and then attacking that caricature. That's straw man. You're making a phony argument and saying it's theirs. No, it's not theirs. Right? So, anybody have any examples of that? Where somebody criticizes a different group, but actually their criticism doesn't hold because they're misrepresenting what that other group actually thinks. Any examples?
I posted a video about it.
Oh, really? Cool. Okay, I didn't click on that. What was that?
I just paid attention to the ad hominems that's what I wrote about, but he talked about straw man.
Okay, and did he give an example of a straw man argument? Do you remember one?
No.
Not really? Okay, and there's a bunch of them in here. All right. Well, anybody have any examples of a straw man where people argue against some position, but that's really not fair because that position really isn't what that group holds or that person? Anybody think of any examples like yes?
I don't know if this holds up to it, but in an argument, my mom and I argue all the time.
Good for you.
She always says that I'm saying these opinions and thinking these things, but it's never actually come out of my mouth or actually thought those things.
Right.
But she's built it up in her head that I have.
Oh, okay.
And she's expressing that that's my opinion.
Yeah, so she's got you pigeonholed.
Yeah.
And then she can show you why what you're thinking and saying really isn't true at all, because it's just ridiculous. But actually, that's not what you were thinking or saying at all. Yeah, so it gets back to, on the one hand, it could just get back to, hey, you got to really listen to your opponent. Make sure that we don't have equivocation going on, right? That we're not taking one term in two different senses. You got to make sure that we understand what they're actually saying. Step number one, right? And then step number two, you can't be vicious. Don't just automatically assume the worst possible interpretation of what they're saying. Why? Because you don't want to be immoral? Because you don't want to be mean? Yeah, that's a good reason. But that's not the reason we're interested in here. Why are we saying don't be vicious? Don't assume the worst interpretation you possibly could when you're arguing with somebody? Because that's bad for reasoning. It's bad for logic. We're talking basic logic here. Not even a matter of ethics. Just a matter of when you're arguing about something, you got to make sure that you're using terms in the same sense. You got to make sure that you actually understand what the other person actually is saying. So then, if you continue to argue with them about that, you're not arguing with them about something that they're not actually saying. Right? So that's straw man argument. It's just absolutely a crime that you didn't learn this stuff in high school. I'm guessing most of you did not. Is that correct? Probably like every one of you, right? That's just, to me, that's like bizarre. These principles I'm going over here, they're from well before Aristotle. Aristotle cataloged hundreds of them. The stuff we're going over here, like 2,500 years old, plus a lot longer than that, probably. Been taught forever, all over the world. Little half second of common sense would teach you that, of course, this is true. Okay, the next one, what about missing the point? You're missing the point of the argument. The premises are leading to this certain conclusion, and you're not seeing the conclusion that they're actually leading to. Okay, what about a red herring? So a red herring, that's a fish, right? So it's called that because that's a way to fool a dog. So you have a dog on your trail, what do you need to do? If you have some herring on you, and you attach it to a squirrel's tail or something, and so then the squirrel goes running off in one direction, and then the dogs end up following the herring because they're interested in that. And then they give up following you because you're what they were supposed to be hunting down, and you're free, right? So the red herring. That's a way when you're arguing with somebody. Now, of course, you could think of this as, hey, here's things you want to learn to do to fool people, to deceive others, right? So you could think of this if you want to be an unethical lawyer, right? But that's not the point here. The point here is how to avoid reasoning mistakes. So, don't do the red herring. If somebody's arguing with you and you're arguing with them, don't go changing the conversation to something else that then they get sidetracked to. Because then you're not even arguing about, you're not even making reasons, you're not even showing reasons for why your conclusion is true. You just change the argument. I mean, if you guys agree to change the conversation, then fine, change the conversation. But don't be fooled, right? Don't be fooled by somebody just changing, bringing up some red herring, which gets you off track. Okay, well, there's fallacies of weak induction, and there's fallacies of presumption, and of ambiguity, and of grammatical analogy. And then he gives examples in ordinary language of this stuff. So this is just great. I encourage you to read it or to follow it. It's in your resources. Hurley LL. Okay, what else did your book talk about? Well, we went through a couple discussion board posts that we discussed a little bit. And I'll recap that as a way to finish up. Number one, you talked about truth and logic, and said that that's about propositions. So propositions, they have a subject and they have a predicate. That is a proposition, right? So the cat is black. So we have a subject and we have a predicate. And then we're able to go out into the world and check whether this is true. So this is assuming then the correspondence theory of truth. Meaning that you could go and look at the cat. Is it actually a cat? Yes or no. Is the cat black? Yes or no. You can go out into the world and check your proposition with it. So if your proposition corresponds to the fact in the world, then your statement is true. If it doesn't, then your statement is false. So this correspondence theory of truth is kind of especially the going theory of truth in the history of philosophy. And probably you're thinking, boring, right? Duh! Yes, but actually it's quite controversial. So we saw some examples of, for example, the guy who says, I am a 6 foot tall Chinese woman. And obviously he was not anywhere near 6 foot tall, right? 6 feet tall. And he certainly wasn't Chinese, right? And then we could have a discussion about gender ideology, but anyway. At least some of what he said certainly was clearly false. But yet the people that he confronted weren't able to say that because of political correctness. Which again is why I grade you by completion, so you have no fears from me about your grade. Because if we can't even talk about things honestly, we can't have an interesting philosophy class. But if you can talk about things honestly, well, it seems like there must be some point of your having this conversation, whatever it is. Or isn't there? You see, one way of running a philosophy class is for me to ask, what do you think? Oh, that's interesting. Hey, what do you think? Oh, that's interesting. Hey, what do you think? Oh, that's interesting. Now, that's a really safe way to teach because there's no way you're going to offend anybody like that, right? But I think it bore the crap out of me. Because what that approach then is assuming is that there's actually nothing to discuss other than our feelings. And that everybody's opinion is equally valid to everybody else's opinion. If that's the case, then there's no fact of the matter. Now sometimes we'll decide there's not a fact of the matter. Do you like Pepsi or do you like Coke? Hey, personal opinion. Come on, seriously. We're not going to argue about that. But can somebody give me some example of something that probably we're going to assume there's a fact of the matter about it, even if it's controversial, even if it's difficult to figure out, we're going to assume that there will be a point to the conversation and that it does matter, even though there's lots of disagreement. Anybody have an example of that? Yeah.
I heard a segment on the radio yesterday. There's a gentleman, I believe he is in Israel, and he's leading a movement claiming that the earth is in fact flat.
Oh, okay. All right. So. Okay. So yeah, we're now just because is that true? I mean, just because somebody says that it's true doesn't mean that it's true, right? So we'd have ways of figuring it out. So you've heard the myth that the ancients and the medievals thought that the world was flat, right? Now, probably most of you believe that they actually thought that, correct? And that's just a phony baloney joke. You know, Aristotle says very clearly, kind of real obvious, how do you know that the world is round? This is Aristotle, around 2,500 years ago, which the ancients and the medievals followed. You know that it's round because you watch a ship going over the ocean and you see that its sail keeps getting lower and lower and lower. It's going around something, right? And also we can notice that, if we have an eclipse, and then you look up there, and you see that it's round, right? So, anyway, no, at all educated ancients, no, they did not believe that the world was flat. So anyway, I just gave a couple little examples of what kind of experiment could we do very easily to see if the world was flat or if the world was round, right? So there's a way to figure it out, yes or no, and there is the truth about it. And it would matter because, what if the world were flat and you go falling off the edge? Well, then you wouldn't want to sail too far, right? So, okay, so we talked about propositions, talked a little bit about truth, and then there's a difference, though, between validity and soundness. You see, you can have an argument that's valid, that doesn't mean it's sound. So let me give you a valid argument. Either P is true or Q is true. It's not the case that P is true. What's the answer? It's either P or it's Q, it's not P. So what is it? It's Q. Is that valid? Yeah, that's valid. Any argument that follows that is valid, correct? Okay, so let's come up with some example. Either I am presently teaching a philosophy class, or I presently am driving my Bugatti. Okay? I should have changed that example because I wanted to come up with something that's absurd, right? Something obviously that's not true. So either I am presently on the moon, or I am presently driving my Bugatti, right? Which one is it? I'm not on the moon, right? I'm not, right? So I'm driving my Bugatti. Is that a valid argument? Yeah, it's valid. It follows a valid form. That's a valid argument. But is it sound? No, it's not sound. The premises aren't true. In this case, because of an informal fallacy. There's a third option which we're not considering, namely that I am teaching a philosophy class. I didn't bring up that example, did I? But I should have, because that's what I'm doing, right? So you can have an argument that's valid, that doesn't mean it's sound. If it's sound, then not only is it valid, and hey, by the way, that's a matter just like of mathematics, black and white, false or true, right? Not about opinion at all. So plenty of what you do in philosophy, when you're arguing deductively, forming valid arguments, there's a fact of the matter about it, a logical fact. Your argument has to be valid. If your argument leads to a contradiction, something's got to change, you got a bad argument. Even if that hurts your feelings or whatever, sorry, you got to change your argument. It's wrong. So there's an element of arguing in philosophy, or in anything, any argument, right? Where the argument needs to be valid. And if it's not valid, that's just as objective as anything in math. Another way to go wrong in the arguing then that we've talked about, informal fallacies. If I said, it's either A or B, right? Not A, so it's got to be B. You didn't mention C, though. What? So that shows my argument was bad. I had a valid argument, but it was not sound because of an informal fallacy. If there was a third option that I did not mention, that's a fallacy. So, we want arguments not only that are valid, we also want them to be sound, meaning their premises are true. And that we're not committing any informal fallacy. Those premises are relevant to the conclusion. What does that mean? That means when you argue, if you have a valid form and your premises are true, that means that your conclusion necessarily follows. It might be that conclusion is one that people don't like. Doesn't matter. So if I have any argument of this form, if P then Q, if Q then R, so if P then R. See, this is just like algebra. X's and Y's. Plug in any number you want. In this case, plug in any term you like. Any argument that follows that form is valid. Now, if those premises are true, it means that conclusion follows necessarily. Another way of saying that is it's not possible that the premises be true and the conclusion be false. Wow, we've gone a long way then in our talk of propositions and truth and validity and soundness. We've come a long way from what is rampant in popular culture, namely epistemological relativism. Meaning, whatever you think is true for you is true for you. Whatever I think is true for me is true for me. So again, in teaching motorcycle classes, you probably, on most things that we're talking about, don't want to be thinking that way because it can get you killed. Lots of examples like that in different things, right? Just because you think it's true doesn't necessarily mean it's true. All right, that's a good little recap for part of the chapter we covered for tonight. You know what to cover for next week. It's in the syllabus. Have a good week.